Today on The State of Us, should college be free? And should student loans be forgiven? Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only Mr. Lance L. Jackson, your friendly redneck liberal and senior resident historian extraordinaire. But Lance, you're not the only one with us today. Isn't that right?
That is true. We have a guest today.
So we've got you, the boomer, me, the millennial, which people are used to.
You know how I love those descriptions.
I know. You love labels. And then we've got one Mr. Richy Richardson, who is Gen Z. So Richy, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So Richy is a college student currently. And since today we are talking about, college, it seemed to make sense to invite someone onto the program. Full disclosure, Lance and I have the opportunity to work with Richy at a different organization here locally, a local nonprofit that actually works with kids. So it's all very fitting. I think it all ties in today. And what we're looking at are basically answering four questions, depending on how we answer them. So in the first segment, we're going to discuss, should existing student loans be forgiven? The second segment, we'll look at, should part or all of college be free? And the third is there a problem? And if so, what is the solution? And hopefully you already know the answer to, is there a problem, by the third segment. But I think you're going to get an interesting variety of perspectives today. So without further ado, Lance, let's get started. First up, should existing student loans be forgiven? What do you think, Lance?
No. Leave more time for the guest. Well, that's a blanket statement.
It is a blanket statement.
Everybody knows I have trouble.
So don't forgive any under any circumstance.
No, I didn't say that. But I also didn't say that we should forgive, nothing either. But when you ask, in the way the question was phrased, the answer is no, because you don't forgive all student debt. I think as we found out in our research, there's a lot of different reasons for the debt. There are a lot of different situations. There are systemic problems within the system. So to just have a blanket statement that we should forgive all student debt, we won't even get into the value of working for something, and all of those.
We won't get into that
exoterrorist type issues. But as you stated the question, I would have to say no. Now, is there some wiggle room as to maybe some possibilities as to when and where and different situations? Possibly. And as our research showed, there are those programs in place right now. They're not being used very well by the government. Hard to believe.
Administrations?
There are some forgiveness programs from the two previous administrations which aren't being used. So do we have some ways to alleviate this problem? Yes. Should we just forgive everything and write it all off and say, gee, it was a bad investment and we're going to start fresh again? Does that solve the problem? Because now what happens in another 20 years? Do we have anything to put in its place that would make it not happen again?
So to summarize, Lance, right? We're saying that as far as just forgive all existing student loan debt, the answer is no. However, you would probably be in favor of forgiveness in certain circumstances, but primarily you'd like to focus on the programs that already exist, doing a better job of making use of those programs than to simply create new things. Rather
than take my pencil and turn the other end over and just erase it, yes. I'm much more. For example, I'm okay with you borrowed the money, but give it 0% interest, because it was very disheartening to read about people who now owe more money than they originally borrowed because they have trouble paying on their debt. That's predatory lending. And I don't like that in any form or fashion, no matter who's doing it. But to go to 0% interest on the loan, hey, you're getting the money back. You're alleviating some of that, pain for people with the 6, 7, 8% interest rates or higher on the government loans. So I'm all for trying to solve the problem somehow other than just taking my eraser and making it all go away.
Okay, so let's talk to Richy now. And Richy, before you answer the question, give listeners a little background, whatever you're comfortable with in terms of, college currently for you. And I guess what I mean by that is, are you somebody that's totally dependent on college loans, not really dependent on them? Are you just a full ride student, silver spoon in the mouth? Like what's the down low here for people? What do they need to know about your college situation? Are you attending a private or a public institution?
Yes. So I am attending the University of Cincinnati, where I am a finance, economics, dual degree, double major with a political science minor. And I have a deal with my parents where they are supposed to be covering half of my college. So they're just paying for half of it out of pocket right now. And then I am getting loans for the other half. And they are currently paying the interest on the loans, so it won't build up over time. And then I get about $3,000 in scholarships each year. So that brings my tuition down to about $25,000 for school and for board and for my meal plan.
Okay. So that's hopefully that gives people a good idea. I think, Lance, right? I mean, from what we've read, this is a fairly good example of sort of this average kind of slightly above average public institution college student. So there's a wide range, obviously, and that's part of, I think, what we're going to talk about. But Richy, go ahead and tell us now about answering this first question. Should existing student loans be forgiven? Lance says no, but maybe make it easier to repay them, and let's use some existing programs.
So I'm also going to say no on a blanket forgiveness of student debt. So one of our articles stated that the wealthiest 20% of households contain almost a third of the student debt, while the bottom 20% own only 8%. So I think it's pretty clear that those top 20% do not need the student loan forgiveness, especially since those are households of students that are most likely going into grad programs or some sort of further education. And that's where all that big money is coming in. And then the bottom 8%, I think that we need to have more options for them to declare bankruptcy on their loans.
Why is that?
I mean, if you can't pay it, then they need to have some sort of financial out. And student loans are the only type of loan, to my knowledge, that you can not get out of by declaring bankruptcy. If you cannot pay your house or you cannot pay your car, then you will simply be able to declare bankruptcy and those loans will be forgiven. Obviously, your credit will be harmed, but that doesn't really apply for student loans. You can't really get rid of those by saying I'm out of money.
But in a house or a car, there's something tangible for someone to receive in return for you not paying your debt. With an education, you've already received the benefits of the schooling, and there's nothing tangible for the person that you owe the money to get in return for your bankruptcy.
Unless you forfeit your degree as part of the bankruptcy. I mean, if we're talking about the value.
But now you're talking about, seeing you're getting into something else, because you're assuming everybody who goes to college
finishes
I know,
and has a degree. A whole other situation if you don't finish.
Right, because the amount of money that most people, the amount of money owed is by people who never finished, who started college and never finished.
If you declare bankruptcy, and I'm not saying that I'm in favor of that, but you could contend, right, that then what you do is you forfeit all requisite college credit received as part of that financial outlay. So the credit cannot be used toward future degrees, nor can your degree. You don't have a degree. Your degree is rescinded. If you choose to go that route, right? If we made bankruptcy available, then you would need to forfeit those things. Unless Richy's contending that you don't need to forfeit those things.
I would contend that you would not need to forfeit those things. I think that would just be simply regressive. In the event that in the future they get on financially stable ground and they want to try to look and obtain a degree again, then that credit loss would only set them back, and they would just be forced to waste time trying to regain credits that they should already have.
Isn't it regressive though when you take money out of my pocket and then just say, I'm not going to pay you back? Because that's where the money comes from the student loan, are people like me who have a job, who have it taxed. That's where the government gets the money to loan to students. And if this is that regressive, because I've invested my money in your education, in a student's education, and I get nothing in return for it. That seems regressive as well. I might as well take the $20 and burn it in the fire tonight.
I think that a way to make up for that is that when they go back to college, in order to reclaim their degrees, they could reclaim the loans and take the loans on again.
But then what's the likelihood that they would ever go back to school? Because if I knew that, okay, if I don't go back to school, I don't have a $30,000 debt. But if I decide to go back to school, now I have to incur $30,000 in debt on top of what it's going to cost me to go to school now and the sacrifices I'm making to go to school. Because I've been a lifelong student. I mean, I got my degree. Actually, I started college, quit college, went to work, got my degree, went to work, went back to college to get a postgraduate degree, and then continued to go to school until the final 10 years of my career. And so I've had my hand in college from the 1980s to 2012. So where's the incentive to go back to school if I have to accept that past loan?
I mean, the incentive could be in that their future potential earnings, that they were not ready to finish college in the first place.
So should existing student loans be forgiven?
What do you think, Justin?
No, I don't think blanket forgiveness is the answer for many reasons, some of which have already been mentioned. Not the least of which is that obviously in life, it's pretty difficult to just get out of a loan altogether and give up nothing. That's usually it's hard to do that. And to your point, Lance, of obviously with most other types of loans that people get, like a car or a house, if you are unable to pay those loans, then you're going to lose the thing that you have. So I don't think it's a good principle simply to just forgive them. I do think that, looking at and some of this again is either already implemented or being implemented, making sure that you're only paying a certain ratio of your total income on your debt service. Because I think this is for existing students, because one thing that we overlook is, I think the whole conversation about forgiveness in part is what we're talking about next. Should part or all of college be free? There is a root problem, and whatever we do for forgiveness does not fix the root problem. It is only a Band-Aid to help people who are currently in the situation. And I liken that to what we talk about, like with prevention for mental health, drug and alcohol abuse, those sorts of things. It's far better to work on the prevention side, and it's far more cost effective to work on fixing the problem before it takes place than it is to treat the problem after it already exists. It's the same concept we've discussed in healthcare too. We absolutely have to do something to take care of the millions of Americans who are burdened by student loan debt. At the same time, we can't stop the conversation there, because it doesn't fix anything long term. It just merely addresses a problem that already exists. I think the idea of dropping the interest rate or eliminating it altogether in certain circumstances is interesting. I think the possibility of allowing bankruptcy with certain stipulations, that's not something that I don't think you and I, Lance, have really discussed much before, but I don't like bankruptcy with no forfeiture of something. But I think that there could be situations where, since bankruptcy as a concept, Lance and I have discussed, we may have some problems with that notion, but since we offer it in other areas of society, it not being offered here, I think we should probably look at it being a last resort. If you've tried these other things and checked these boxes, then maybe you have the option to do that. But what do you give up if you do that? So next, again, we're looking at should part or all of college be free? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Should part or all of college be free? We've spent some time talking about should existing student loans be forgiven, and the consensus is that no, blanket forgiveness is not the answer. At least that's what one boomer, one millennial, and one Gen Z all have to say about this, is blanket forgiveness not the answer. Different ideas about maybe what we could do to address and help the situation, but blanket forgiveness is not the route that any of us are contending that we go. So let's talk about this business of making college, part of it, all of it, free. Let's start this time around with Richy.
I think that in the future that college should be free, but I do not think that in the current state of the U.S. government that it should be free. And my reasoning behind that is we do not have the tax revenue. The government does not have the tax revenue to be paying for this, and it would only further entrench the U.S. government into debt.
So in other words, it's something we should be working towards, but it's not a flip the switch overnight and college is free tomorrow.
No, I think we need to revise the tax system to pay for it first.
Well, man, we could go down a rabbit hole that direction, but let's remain focused on, you say college should be free, because the other thing is this question is worded intentionally to be ambiguous. College. What do we mean college? I mean, does this mean that I can spend 12 years in college and it's all paid for? Or does it mean that I get 2 years of college? What do you mean when you say college, that we should be working toward free college? What does that mean?
So when I think of a free college, I think of 4 years. So that's how long it should take you to get a traditional bachelor's degree. So at most 4 years.
So 4 years, and then this is where, and I don't want to get too bogged down in the minutia, we're talking about like a standard credit load over a total of 8 semesters, essentially.
Yeah. So 120 credits, 4 years, 30 credits a year.
Is it capped based on you earning the credits? So in other words, is it whatever comes first, 120 credits or 4 years, whatever happens first?
4 years.
Okay. So you get 4 years. So if you can do 200 credits in 4 years, you're welcome to do that.
So my college caps you out at 18 credits a semester. So if you take 21 credit hours, or if you take 19 credit hours, you will be charged more money. So the maximum you can take is 18 credit hours.
So you'd be proposing following something similar to that.
Yeah.
There's a max you can take. You're welcome to take more than that, but you would obviously have to then pay.
Yes.
For whatever you take that's above and beyond.
I think that, and I'm going to use history as an example.
Oh boy.
I think all college should be free, including any kind of technical school. And it should be free for the life of the learner, as we know that the number of careers that the average student is going to have is probably 7, 4 of which don't even exist yet. So there's going to be a constant need for a re-education of the worker in order to stay employed for the number of years that they're going to have to work, because we also know that life expectancy is increasing. And I base this on history because we go back to post-Civil War up through the 1900s, most students, I think it was only 10% of the people of the population got a high school diploma, because there were no public education facilities available. And so we made it a push in this country to say, we are going to build more public high schools so that more people can get educated. And what we saw, and this is where I disagree with our respected guest, we can't afford not to make college free, because one of the greatest booms in economics in the United States was from 1900 to 1970, which we saw the relationship of the number of people getting a high school diploma. So the more educated the populace becomes, the more they can contribute in the workplace, the more money they make, the more money that can be taxed then by the government, and you end up paying for it. So I would argue that we can't afford not to make any kind of post-secondary education free. And as someone who didn't graduate in 4 years, someone who had to work to pay the bills while I was going to school, I wouldn't put that stipulation on someone as well, because I was a non-traditional student who was working 40 to 60 hours a week, married while I was attempting to finish college, my undergraduate degree, and I worked all through my master's degree and my 40, 50 plus hours past my master's. I worked full time, actually 2 jobs while I was getting those degrees.
What year can we ask, Lance, what year did you graduate high school?
79.
Okay.
Graduated college in 85.
Okay, so we have several articles linked to thestateofus.org. I'm just going to share a little piece here. So looking at data from 1974 on the median American family.
Wait a minute, what about you?
Well, I'm about to share that.
You're gonna use the okay.
But I'm going to share some data first.
Yeah, Justin doesn't have an opinion. He has data. Okay, here we go.
My opinion is the data.
He has the facts on his side.
That's right.
That's right. So we're looking at the median American family from 1974. We're adjusting those numbers into today's dollars. Okay, so the numbers you're hearing are based on today's money. The median family income was $62,000 in 1974. A house could be acquired for $174,000 and a sticker price of $21,300 for the car, $10,300 for the private university, and $2,500 for the public university. Obviously, a lot has changed since then. Median family income has risen slightly to about $64,000, up from $62,000, while median home prices have about doubled, and the price of cars has also about doubled. But the real outlier is higher education. Tuition at a private university is now roughly 3 times as expensive as it was in 1974, costing an average of $31,000 a year. Public tuition at $9,000 has risen by nearly 4 times. So while what Lance said is true, and by no means does it diminish the impressiveness of what he was able to accomplish, it is also worth clearly mentioning that while relative to what an average family could make then versus what they can make today, it is substantially more expensive to get a college degree today than it was in the 70s. And those costs so far have continued to rise. So as we talk about the value of college education, and therefore should it be free, to me, I think a big part of that is it worth it being free? Lance talks a lot about the value of the college education. And I think part of what we have access to, one of the studies that is also linked at thestateofus.org, tells us that over a quarter of programs, over 30,000 bachelor's degrees that were studied across the United States, over a quarter of those programs have a negative return on investment. In other words, you will not make back by getting that degree what you put into getting that degree. So when I think about should college be free, I think about, well, what college are we talking about should be free? In other words, what degrees are we paying for? Because if the degree you get provides a negative return, is that really something that we want to invest our money in?
Excuse me, though, but is it all about economics? Isn't there the intrinsic value of education?
There is the societal and moral value to a better educated public, which I believe in. I think that people should seek to be lifelong learners. I think we've also talked a lot about on this show that the notion that education only happens in a high school classroom or in a college lecture room, that is also a fundamental problem of the way that we view education. That is not the only form of education that exists, nor is it the only form of education that we ought to be supporting. I don't think anyway.
There are a lot of degrees that, you may not be making the big money from, but there are degrees that we need in society. So a lot of social workers typically do not make good money. A lot of veterinarians do not make good money. A lot of people that work in zoology and in other careers that, don't have big returns, but we still need the people to fill those positions in society.
Yeah, there are a number of, and this is part of where the nuance comes into deciding, how much is any given degree worth, the nuance that arrives of how bad does society, quote unquote, need a profession, and therefore is it okay to deliver it at a negative ROI? An example of a field that I think is often, the data supports, only about 1% of psychology programs have a positive return on investment. Do we need psychologists? Of course. Do we need people that go into psychology programs? Of course. Do we need as many psychology majors as we have? No. There are way too many people getting psychology degrees. And the data supports that most of them are not employed in a field where that degree is providing a direct benefit to them, where they could have gotten a different degree that would have helped them in their field and delivered a better return on investment.
But we have discussed at multiple occasions how bad the mental health is of people in the United States. So maybe we do need them. We just are not, to Richie's point, we're just not valuing them enough. And so they're having to go into something else because there's no way for people to pay for the mental health that they need.
then we need to increase the demand and allow the ROI to increase for those fields. But churning out people with degrees for which there are no jobs, that is not a good college plan. Society should fix the demand for those jobs. I don't disagree that we need more mental health professionals, but the demand should come and then the supply should follow. If we create the supply, but these people can't get jobs, that doesn't help us.
This data doesn't really measure a lot of the positive externalities that are coming from certain people getting degrees. So there's poor return on investment for psychology degrees, but it doesn't measure the value of somebody going to that psychologist and getting the help they need and the investment that was put into that person's education and how much, keeping that person from taking their own life saves the economy.
Sure. We're solely talking about here, if it costs Richy $80,000 to go to college, will the degrees he get for him return more than what was put in to give him that education? That's the, raw data on the individual person, not the trickle down benefits, because it varies widely, to your point, by field. Obviously, somebody who studies economics and becomes a stock trader has arguably far less trickle down benefit than the social worker, but the ROI would dictate that the person who is going to go be the stockbroker is going to definitely be worth the return on investment, while the social worker may not be. Again, you want to go into a field with a negative ROI, that's your prerogative. We live in a nation where you should be allowed to do that. Whether or not it's our job to pay for it, and whether or not you should go into it not knowing that, I think those are problematic. So we're going to continue the discussion. I think we all agree there is a problem. So the question is, what is the solution? We've started to talk about that. We're going to keep talking about it. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. The value of college degrees today, we've talked about so far. Should existing student loans be forgiven, and should part or all of college be free? I believe, to summarize so far, right, Richy wants us to get to that system, but doesn't believe that system can happen overnight, and that we raise the tax revenue requisite to that, and that it should pay for 4 years, basically, of college, cap of 18 credits per semester, 120 credits total. You get 4 years. That's what we're paying for. And Lance says lifelong access to college. Let's return to that briefly if we can, Lance. What stipulations are on this? I mean, in other words, if I just want to go and hang out at college and forever be in the education system, how do we make sure that doesn't happen with this, free college forever for everyone?
Well, you're not getting living expenses.
No room and board is part of this.
You're still providing for yourself, right? The tuition is free.
Okay.
And so you have to work at something else so that you can, there are programs at most major universities for senior citizens that allow you to audit the class, that you don't get any financial aid at all, but you're allowed to sit in on the class and be a part of the discussions and take the class. I would also raise the standards. I don't think that an education today is as good as it used to be. Here's where I sound like the old white man that I am, is that we have great inflation. The fastest rising part of post-secondary schooling is remedial classes for people who are not ready to enter college. Those are where the greatest numbers of students are having to be taught, is in those remedial math and English classes, science classes, so that they can just get into college. So those are some of, I think, what you were heading towards. So I think as long as you are making advancement, you can be, what's wrong with being a lifelong student? As long as I'm providing my own housing and insurance and everything else through whatever work I'm doing, why wouldn't we encourage people to continue learning about the world they live in?
I don't disagree with people continuing to learn. I think it's a question of, again, fundamentally, what are we wanting to achieve with education in society? And I think that's part of wherein lies then the problem about how everybody answers this question separately. Is the purpose of college to generate a better economy? Well, yes. Is it to increase the knowledge base of society, make us a more informed electorate? Hopefully. But how do we pay for this?
As I said, how do we not pay for it?
In the interim of the alleged payback of this program, we front the money, borrow the money, make it available, and count on the fact that long term we'll earn that back. Because there's going to be the upfront cost. It's not going to be an overnight return.
Okay, do we really need a $500 screwdriver for NASA? Do we really need all the military bases that we have? Do we really need all of these other programs where there's lots of government waste? What we spend on education is a minute part of the federal budget. It wouldn't be that hard to get the money to spend on education, and you actually get a return.
I suppose it depends on what the American people most want, which we've talked about. It's nice to have the lofty goals, but do people want the lofty goals? And have we given them the opportunity to achieve the lofty goals? Richie?
So I can give you my perspective on the solution. So I did say that in the future we should raise the taxes and so that we can pay for universal education. But in the meantime, I think that we need to increase our funding into universities instead of increasing federal aid dollars. For every federal aid dollar given to students, the price of tuition goes up by 60 cents. And so when we are focusing more on the supply side of universities and their ability to provide for students, then we are able to, decrease the cost instead of just increasing inflation every year, increasing the inflated tuition prices every year.
By the way, on your solution, I don't think we asked, are room and board included as part of that, or is that separate? Because Lance says in his room and board's not included. You want that, you have to pay for it.
I agree with Lance on that room and board should be separate because, I think that there are students who have the opportunity to, live at home and commute to college. And I think that they're, giving up a good, which is, living on college campus and being able to experience campus life. And so therefore, economically, you should be forced to pay for that because I think that's a pure good.
Before I ask you your opinion, Justin, so we can wrap this all up, I would just say to Richie, we don't need to raise taxes to do what he wants to do. We can reallocate tax money that we already have. And secondly, the final part of my solution, as we transition from the current system to what we're both talking about here, is make all loans 0% interest.
The root of the problem is part of the reason that we have the cost and program issues and people getting degrees that they don't then end up being employed specifically in is a lack of clarity about why one goes to college in the first place. The answer is complex. People go for different reasons. Some are there primarily for the experience of it. Some are there because they believe that a piece of paper is worth it. It doesn't matter what the piece of paper is. Some are there simply for the ROI. They want to make a certain amount of money, and therefore they're going to go in and get the education necessary to make that money. We have talked about other things that I feel like I'm not opposed to discussing some of these. I'm opposed to aggressively moving forward on them without doing some of the other things that I think are also important. The concern I have about making college free for everybody is that then we also indicate, like we have done with high school, for example, that college is an expectation and right of the American society. And while I agree that we need people to go to college, I also know, and I mean, we are witnessing a serious problem in trade fields where prices are skyrocketing in part because we don't have enough people to meet the demand in those fields. We need good plumbers. We need good electricians. We need more people working in construction. And those people, many of them do not need any college. They don't need any. And so from a benefit to society and a fulfillment of that person's life, I don't know that it's our place to place our middle or upper middle class values on them to tell them that we are making college free. And therefore, as a society, we expect people as we expect them to attend high school.
You jumped a lot of hurdles there. Nobody in this room said we were putting anybody's values on it. We just said we're going to make it available to people. Nobody says they can't choose to do something else. There's no expectation there. You
can choose, but you're making it much easier for people to choose that if they have no plan. And also the notion of none of this is free, right? I mean, we're all saying it's free, but it's not free. We pay for it somehow. Somebody pays for it somewhere. I think that if you're going to make that available to people, that they should have to first complete what Lance and I have talked about before, which we feel, I think, strongly about, some degree of a national service program. And that can be the military, it can be direct service for the government, or it can be for any 501c3 registered nonprofit anywhere in the United States. If you first did that, and then you've completed that, and then you want to go this route, I'd be much more comfortable at that point. And I think, for what it's worth, I'd contend that there'd probably be a lot more Americans that'd be more comfortable at that point being willing to pay for that college, because they will have a much better idea then probably of what they want to first do before they go into college, which only increases the value of the degrees. Or they may have decided that college is not for them, and therefore no need for them to go and to take use of that. Or it's not for them right now. Because there's that other thing we talked about. Lance highlighted that, but his career has been lifelong education. Some people, I mean, I went to school with people at Xavier who were in their 40s and going to school for the first time. So the notion of that it happens at one time and that's the right time for everybody, I think, is also the thing we have to be careful about in making sure that we're setting up young people who don't necessarily know what they want to do in the world to have the most beneficial impact to society at the lowest cost, while also giving them the opportunity to seek education if that's what they want to do. But as we talked about before, that requires a big overhaul of a system, a lot more complicated than some of the other things that have been proposed. So, which is understandable why most people don't want to do that. ROI should be published as part of programs. And if that scares us, then I think we need to do a better job of talking to our students, not to dissuade them from going into programs that have negative ROI, but to make sure that all students have access to that information up front, so that nobody can claim having been hoodwinked by going into a program for which there are no available jobs and a negative return on investment. If they still want to do that, eyes wide open, then again, more power to them. But not getting duped into predatory programs, being told that college is a key to success, and then being hoodwinked into massive debt for something that they can't make their money back on. Again, they want to go into it and they know those things, then I think we should all be okay with that. But I think we shouldn't be afraid to tell people up front the real cost benefit to them of a program, at least in the transitionary period to whatever this free college program for Richy and Lance looks like. So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, because here at True Chat, we have a mission. And our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done that today, I hope. And if you enjoyed today's show, tell your family and friends, discuss it with them. And when they say, where are you getting all these great ideas? Tell them, I'm listening to The State of Us. And tell them they too can listen as a podcast to the show on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us can be heard Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. We're also distributed on AM and FM radio stations around the country on the weekends. Have no word of the day today. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
I'm Richy Richardson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch for the extra work today and putting up with a guest. And thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. If you have thoughts on today's show, send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.